They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I say it's best served with a bulldozer and a stack of property deeds. I never wanted war with the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. For 3 years, I kept my head down, paid their ridiculous dues, and tried to fly under the radar of their militant community standards enforcers. But some people just can't leave well enough alone, especially people drunk on the microscopic amount of power that comes with an HOA badge. It all started with my workshop. Not even a proper shed, really. Just a modest 12x16 structure I built in my backyard to house my woodworking equipment. I'd spent 15 years as a master carpenter before transitioning to architecture, and that workshop was my sanctuary, my creative space where I still crafted furniture on weekends. Nothing fancy on the outside, but it was solidly built with my own 2 hands. "Mr. Reeves?" The voice that interrupted my Saturday morning coffee carried the unmistakable tone of someone who enjoyed making other people's lives difficult. I looked up from my porch swing to see Patricia Donovan, the newly elected HOA president, standing at my gate with a clipboard and a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's me," I replied, not bothering to get up. I'd met Patricia briefly, at the annual HOA meeting, where she'd campaigned on a platform of restoring Meadowbrook's pristine aesthetic. "Red flag number 1. I'm here about the unauthorized structure in your backyard." She gestured vaguely behind my house, where the peaked roof of my workshop was visible. "Our records show no approved request for external construction." I set down my coffee. "That's because it was here when I bought the house 3 years ago. Previous owner built it. It was disclosed in all the sales documents, which the HOA received copies of." Her smile tightened. "Nevertheless, it doesn't conform to our architectural guidelines. The board reviewed it yesterday and determined it's an eyesore that decreases property values." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "An eyesore? It's barely visible from the street." "We've had complaints," she said, her voice taking on that particular bureaucratic chill that suggested the only complaint had come from her. Section 8.3 of the covenant clearly states that all external structures must maintain the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood. And what exactly is offensive about it? I was genuinely curious what arbitrary standard I'd failed to meet. Patricia consulted her clipboard as if the answer lay in her precious paperwork. "The materials don't match the primary residence. The roof pitch is non-conforming, and the color scheme is not from the approved palette. It's a workshop, not a dollhouse," I said. "And again, it predates my ownership." "That's irrelevant, Mr. Reeves. Non-conforming structures must be brought up to code or removed, regardless of when they were built." She produced a notice from her clipboard. "You have 30 days to either submit modification plans for board approval or dismantle the structure." I took the paper, skimming the officious language and the threat of fines. "And if I do neither?" Her smile returned. "This time with genuine pleasure. Then the HOA will take corrective action and bill you for the expenses." As she walked away, I had no idea that her corrective action would ignite a war that would consume our entire community. The 30 days came and went. I submitted no plans, made no modifications, and ignored 3 increasingly threatening notices left on my door. I was busy with a major project at my architecture firm, and frankly, I considered the whole thing too absurd to warrant my attention. That was my first mistake. I returned home from a 3-day business trip to find my workshop gone, not modified, not partially dismantled, completely gone, as if it had never existed. In its place was a patch of fresh sod, unnaturally green against the drier grass surrounding it. For a full minute I stood staring, wondering if exhaustion had me hallucinating. Then the rage hit, a cold, clarifying fury that made my vision sharpen rather than blur. My tools, my projects, the rocking chair I'd been building for my sister's first child, my father's antique hand planes, passed down through 3 generations, all gone. I was still standing there when a silver Mercedes pulled up across the street. Patricia emerged, wearing the self-satisfied expression of a dictator inspecting her domain. When she spotted me, she had the audacity to wave. I crossed the street so quickly she took a step back, her smile faltering. "Where is my property?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "Mr. Reeves, you were given ample notice. Where is my property?" Each word was its own sentence. She straightened, armor of officiousness sliding back into place. The non-conforming structure was removed per section 14.2 of the covenant. "You'll find the bill in your mailbox." "My tools, my equipment, family heirlooms. Where are they?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. The contractor was instructed to remove the structure only. If there were items inside, $15,000 worth of professional tools, irreplaceable family heirlooms, a project I've been working on for months. She took another step back. "You should have removed your belongings after receiving notice. The HOA is not responsible for personal items left in non-conforming structures, slated for removal." I leaned in, close enough to see her pupils dilate with unease. "You stole from me. You destroyed my property. That's not enforcing a covenant. That's criminal." "The police won't see it that way," she sniffed, though her confidence was clearly shaken. "We acted within our legal rights. We'll see about that." I turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Patricia? You have no idea what you've just started." She was right about one thing. The police weren't particularly helpful. They viewed it as a civil matter between me and the HOA. The responding officer suggested I file a lawsuit and walked me through the process of documenting my losses. That night I pulled out every document related to my home purchase. The deed, the surveys, the sale agreement, everything. I'd been an architecture student when my grandfather died, leaving me a modest inheritance. Not enough to change my life, but enough for a down payment on this house, which had seemed like a steal at the time. Now I understood why. Who wants to live under the thumb of clipboard-wielding tyrants? Among the paperwork was a property survey I'd barely glanced at during closing. I spread it out on my dining table, trying to understand the exact boundaries of my lot. That's when I noticed something odd. The survey showed my property line extending about 10 feet beyond my backyard fence into what I'd always assumed was community land. Curious, I pulled up the county's property records online and cross-referenced. According to both documents, I owned not just my yard, but a sliver of the land beyond it, land that stretched like a narrow finger into the area behind several neighboring properties. It made no sense. Why would my lot include this strange extension? The answer came at 2 a.m., after hours of digging through historical property records. Meadowbrook Estates had once been farmland, divided and subdivided over generations. When the developers bought it, they'd missed something crucial, a narrow access easement that had been part of my lot's deed for over a century, originally used to reach a spring that had long since dried up. But that wasn't the bombshell. The real revelation came when I located the original subdivision plans. That thin strip of land didn't just extend behind my immediate neighbors. It continued following the old easement path, directly underneath the HOA's community clubhouse, pool and tennis courts. I owned the land beneath the crown jewels of Meadowbrook Estates. For the first time since finding my workshop destroyed, I smiled. "So let me get this straight," said Marcus Jensen, a real estate attorney I'd worked with on several commercial projects. "You own the land under their clubhouse? And the pool, tennis courts, and about half their precious community garden," I confirmed, spreading the documents across his desk. "It looks like when the developer purchased the separate parcels to create Meadowbrook, they missed this easement entirely. They built on land they didn't fully own." Marcus whistled, reviewing the surveys. "And you're sure the HOA doesn't know?" "Positive. I've reviewed all the documents from my closing." The title search flagged the irregular lot shape but attributed it to historical quirks that weren't relevant to the sale. Nobody connected the dots. This is, he searched for the right word, unprecedented. In theory, you have grounds to demand removal of any structures on your property. Just like they removed my workshop? The symmetry was too perfect. Well, yes, but... He looked up, alarm crossing his face. Jack, tell me you're not thinking what I think you're thinking. I shrugged. They established the precedent, not me. Non-conforming structures must be removed. There's a slight difference between a backyard workshop and a community clubhouse serving 200 homes, he pointed out. Is there? According to Patricia Donovan, rules are rules. I leaned forward. I'm not looking to be unreasonable, Marcus. I just want them to understand the precariousness of their position before we negotiate. Negotiate what? Compensation for my losses, revisions to their draconian rules, and a sincere apology wouldn't hurt. He sighed, rubbing his temples. As your attorney, I have to advise you that antagonizing an entire HOA could make your life very difficult. More difficult than having irreplaceable family heirlooms destroyed? I asked quietly. Marcus studied me for a long moment, then nodded. All right, let's talk strategy. I waited 2 weeks before making my move. 2 weeks of meticulous planning, of secretly meeting with surveyors to mark exact property lines, of consulting with contractors and drafting official notices that mirrored, word for word, the ones the HOA had sent me. During those 2 weeks, Patricia made a point of driving by my house daily, slowing to inspect the pristine patch of grass that had replaced my workshop. Once she even stopped to take photos, documenting her victory for the HOA newsletter, no doubt. On day 15, a Saturday morning when I knew the clubhouse would be bustling with weekend activities, I parked my truck at the curb and walked calmly inside. The large common room was filled with neighbors attending a gardening workshop. Patricia stood at the front, gesturing to a PowerPoint slide about approved native plantings. Excuse me, I said loudly, interrupting her mid-sentence. I need everyone's attention for an important announcement. Patricia's face flushed with indignation. Mr. Reeves, we are in the middle of a presentation. If you have HOA business, you can submit it through proper channels. This isn't HOA business, I replied. This is private property business. My property, specifically. Confused murmurs rippled through the room. I held up a large survey map. According to county records and multiple independent surveys, I am the legal owner of the land on which this clubhouse, the pool, and the tennis courts are built. I paused, letting that sink in. These structures were built without my permission, and without any easement or rental agreement in place. The room erupted in disbelief. Patricia's face went from flushed to ashen. That's absurd, she sputtered. This is community property, established when Meadowbrook was developed. Actually, no. This parcel was never properly acquired by the developer. It's been part of my lot's deed for over 100 years. I nodded toward the windows, where people could now see surveyors placing markers along the property line. You can see I'm having the boundaries officially marked today. An older man stood up. Walter Garrison, the former HOA president who'd recruited Patricia as his successor. What exactly are you trying to pull here, Reeves? I'm not pulling anything. I'm enforcing my property rights, just as the HOA recently did when they removed a structure from my backyard without my consent. That was different, Patricia interjected. Your shed violated community guidelines. Workshop, I corrected. And these facilities violate my property rights. Following the HOA's own precedent, I've prepared a notice. I held up the document. You have 30 days to remove all structures from my land or submit a formal lease proposal for my consideration. The chaos that followed was everything I'd hoped for. Shouts of outrage, demands for proof. Neighbors turning on Patricia demanding to know how this could have happened. I stood calmly at the center of the storm, answering questions with the patience of someone who knew he held all the cards. Eventually, Walter managed to restore enough order to ask the question everyone wanted answered. "What do you want, Reeves?" I smiled. "A committee meeting. Tomorrow. We have terms to discuss." They tried everything to invalidate my claim. Title searches, historical record deep dives, consultations with the developer's attorneys. But the evidence was irrefutable. The land was mine, had always been mine, and every structure built upon it was there without permission. The emergency meeting the next day was held not in the clubhouse, now recognized as my property, but in Walter Garrison's oversized living room. The entire HOA board was present, along with their attorney, a nervous young man clearly out of his depth. Patricia had been uncharacteristically quiet until the attorney confirmed my claim was legitimate. Then she exploded. "This is blackmail," she shouted, pacing the room like a caged animal. "He's holding community assets hostage." "Interesting perspective," I replied coolly. "I see it as protecting my property rights, something the HOA claims to value above all else." Walter, more pragmatic than Patricia, cut to the chase. "Name your terms, Reeves." I pulled out a document. "First, complete compensation for my destroyed workshop and all contents, valued at $3,750. Second, a revision of HOA rules to allow reasonable personal structures on private property. Third, the immediate resignation of Patricia Donovan from the board." "Absolutely not." Patricia slammed her hand on the coffee table. "This is extortion." "No, this is negotiation," I corrected. "Extortion would be if I simply brought in bulldozers tomorrow and leveled the clubhouse without warning, which, I remind you, is exactly what you did to my workshop." The HOA attorney cleared his throat. "Mr. Reeves does have legal standing here. The structures are on his property without consent." "Then we'll take it to court," Patricia insisted. "File for adverse possession or eminent domain." The attorney shook his head. "Adverse possession requires decades of open use without the owner's knowledge or objection. Mr. Reeves has objected immediately upon discovery. As for eminent domain, HOAs don't have that power." Walter shot Patricia a silencing look before turning back to me. "The financial compensation is reasonable. The rule revisions we can discuss, but demanding board resignations is overstepping." "Is it?" Patricia unilaterally ordered the destruction of my property, including irreplaceable family heirlooms. Her judgment is fatally flawed. I leaned forward. "But I'm willing to compromise. Instead of resignation, how about a public apology and a binding agreement that she recuse herself from any decisions involving my property?" Walter glanced at Patricia, whose face had gone an alarming shade of purple. "We can work with that," he said before she could object. "Excellent." I slid the document across the table. "You have until Friday to sign. After that, I start charging retroactive rent for use of my land, let's say $5,000 per day?" As I stood to leave, Patricia finally found her voice. "This isn't over, Reeves." I smiled pleasantly. "For your sake, I hope it is." I should have known Patricia Donovan wouldn't go down without a fight. The HOA board, led by Walter's more pragmatic faction, signed my agreement on Friday as required. By Monday morning, work had begun on rebuilding my workshop, this time with full HOA approval. But Patricia had one last card to play. I was at work when my phone exploded with texts from neighbors. Apparently, a construction crew had shown up at the clubhouse and begun dismantling the deck that extended toward the pool. A deck that was fully on my property according to the surveys. By the time I arrived, a sizable crowd had gathered. The construction foreman approached me, confusion evident. "Are you Jack Reeves? We've got conflicting instructions here. HOA president says this deck needs to come down today because it's on private property." I glanced over at Patricia, who stood smugly by her Mercedes. "Did she mention that I'm the property owner and that we have a signed agreement in place?" The foreman scratched his head. "Lady just said to tear it down before you could stop us. Something about teaching you a lesson about destruction of property. I had to admire the pettiness, destroying part of her own beloved clubhouse just to spite me. The perfect encapsulation of HOA logic. The deck stays, I told him. In fact, all construction stops immediately. Patricia sauntered over, triumph written across her face. Not so fun when it's your property being demolished without warning, is it? The difference, I said quietly, is that you signed an agreement 3 days ago acknowledging my ownership and establishing terms for continued use of this land. An agreement signed under duress, she countered. Our attorney says we can challenge it on those grounds. I smiled. Your attorney is welcome to try. In the meantime, since you violated our agreement by attempting unauthorized modification of structures on my land, I'm exercising my right to revoke usage permission. Her smile faltered. What does that mean? It means, I said, raising my voice so the gathered crowd could hear, that as of this moment, the clubhouse, pool, and tennis courts are closed until further notice. The collective gasp was satisfying, but Patricia's sputtering rage was even better. You can't do that. The community pool opens for the season this weekend. Actually, I can. It's my land, and you've just demonstrated that the HOA can't be trusted to honor our agreement. I turned to address the crowd. I suggest you direct your complaints to Ms. Donovan, who decided that petty revenge was more important than community access to facilities. As I walked away, the murmurs of discontent swelled into open anger, not at me, but at Patricia. Sometimes the best revenge is simply stepping aside and letting someone face the consequences of their own actions. The emergency HOA meeting that night was held in the cul-de-sac at the center of the neighborhood, neutral territory. Nearly every homeowner attended, creating a circle of lawn chairs and simmering resentment. Walter called the meeting to order, his normal diplomatic tone strained. As you all know, we're facing an unprecedented situation regarding our community facilities. Because Patricia tried to demolish the clubhouse deck out of spite, someone called out. Patricia stood, facing the hostile crowd with her chin raised defiantly. I was protecting our community interests by asserting our right to maintain our own facilities. By destroying them? Another voice shouted incredulously. Walter intervened before things could escalate further. The point is, Mr. Reeves has revoked access to the facilities pending a new agreement. The summer pool season starts this weekend, and many families have planned events at the clubhouse over the coming months. All eyes turned to me. I'd positioned my chair slightly apart from the circle, a visual reminder of my outsider status. My position is simple, I said into the expectant silence. I entered an agreement in good faith. That agreement was violated within days. I'm open to a new arrangement, but with different leadership in place. You want me to resign? Patricia said flatly. I want the community to decide if someone who would damage their own facilities out of personal vindictiveness should remain in a position of authority. What followed was 2 hours of the most honest community discussion Meadowbrook Estates had ever witnessed. Long simmering resentments about the HOA's heavy-handed enforcement bubbled to the surface. Other homeowners shared stories of citations for minor infractions. Flowers of unapproved colors, mailboxes half an inch too tall, garbage cans visible for 15 minutes after collection. This isn't about a workshop or a clubhouse, said Eleanor Chen, a retired judge whose impeccable garden had still somehow earned her 3 citations in the past year. This is about whether we want to live in a community or under a regime. By the end of the night, Patricia Donovan was no longer HOA president. She wasn't even on the board. The vote was nearly unanimous, with only her sister and one loyal friend dissenting. Walter approached me as the meeting dispersed. You'll have a new agreement on your desk tomorrow. The board is restructuring completely. Less focus on enforcement, more on actual community building. He offered his hand. We owe you an apology, Jack. What happened to your workshop was inexcusable. I shook his hand. It was never about the workshop, Walter. It was about the principle. And the land beneath the clubhouse? He asked. The question that had been on everyone's mind. I smiled. Let's just say the community has a very generous landlord. 6 months later, my new workshop stood completed in my backyard, slightly larger than the original, with improved features like proper insulation and a small covered porch where I could enjoy my morning coffee while planning the day's projects. The HOA had not only compensated me for my losses, but had gone above and beyond, establishing a community woodworking program where I taught interested neighbors basic skills. My first project with them? Building new poolside furniture for the clubhouse, a clubhouse now standing on land officially leased to the HOA for the token sum of $1 per year, with a 99-year renewable term. Patricia Donovan put her house on the market 3 weeks after the vote. According to realtors, she'd moved to a gated community 2 towns over, one with an even stricter HOA. Some people never learn. As for me, I'd gone from pariah to reluctant neighborhood hero. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd become more involved in the community by fighting against those who claimed to represent it. Eleanor Chen, the retired judge who'd spoken so eloquently at that pivotal meeting, had replaced Patricia as HOA president. Under her leadership, the association focused on actual community building, block parties, volunteer days, and a complete overhaul of the rulebook to focus on safety and cooperation rather than aesthetic control. My favorite change? The newly established character clause in the HOA covenant, which specifically protected unique structures that contribute to the neighborhood's diverse character and residents' quality of life. One evening, as I sat on my workshop porch sanding a table leg, a silver Mercedes slowed in front of my house. Patricia, making what I assumed was a final drive-by before leaving Meadowbrook for good. Our eyes met across the distance. I raised my coffee mug in a small salute. After a moment's hesitation, she gave a curt nod before driving away. Some might call it victory. I prefer to think of it as restoration, not just of my workshop, but of something more fundamental. The understanding that a community is built not on uniformity and control, but on respect for each person's small piece of earth and what they choose to create upon it. In the end, it wasn't about the land beneath the clubhouse. It was about remembering what truly lies beneath any community worth the name, a foundation not of rules, but of neighbors who see each other as people rather than violations waiting to happen. Though I have to admit, the look on Patricia's face when she realized I owned her precious clubhouse, that was pretty satisfying too. I'd like to say the story ended there, a tidy resolution with justice served and community harmony restored. But real life rarely wraps up so neatly, does it? The ripples from our HOA showdown continued to spread, in ways I never anticipated. 3 months after Patricia's departure, I received a certified letter from an address 2 towns over. Inside was a formal notice informing me that I was being personally sued by Patricia Donovan for intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation of character, and loss of standing in the community. She was seeking $1.5 million in damages. Called Marcus immediately. "Is this for real?" I asked after forwarding him the documents. He sighed heavily into the phone. "Unfortunately, yes. Anyone can sue for anything in America. Doesn't mean they'll win. But defamation? I never lied about her. Everything I said was documented fact." "Which is your best defense," he assured me. "But Jack, you need to understand something about people like Patricia Donovan. They can't accept defeat, especially public defeat. This lawsuit isn't about winning money. It's about regaining control of the narrative." He was right, of course. The lawsuit was Patricia's attempt to recast herself as the victim, a dedicated community servant unfairly targeted by a vindictive homeowner. The complaint included gems like malicious undermining of legitimate authority and orchestrated humiliation before her peers. What followed was 6 months of legal annoyance, depositions, document exchanges, and mounting legal bills. Patricia had apparently found an attorney desperate enough for work to take her case on contingency, believing the HOA's insurance might offer a settlement just to make the problem go away. The most surreal moment came during my deposition when Patricia's lawyer asked with complete seriousness, "Mr. Reeves, isn't it true that you purchased your home in Meadowbrook Estates as part of a long-term scheme to undermine the homeowners association?" I nearly laughed out loud. I bought my house because I liked the floor plan and it was in my price range. I had no idea about the land issue until after the HOA destroyed my workshop. But you admit you deliberately researched property records looking for leverage against the association? I researched my own property rights after the association illegally demolished my workshop and destroyed my personal belongings. That's called due diligence, not a scheme. On and on it went. Attempts to twist basic facts into some elaborate conspiracy. The most telling moment came when I finally saw Patricia in person at a hearing. She'd lost weight, and there was a brittle energy about her that hadn't been there before. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I expected anger. Instead, I glimpsed something more complex, a wounded pride that had calcified into obsession. This wasn't about a workshop anymore, or even a clubhouse. For Patricia, this was existential, a battle to reclaim her identity as someone who mattered, who had power. I felt something unexpected. Pity. The case never made it to trial. The judge dismissed it with a scathing assessment of its merits, or lack thereof. Patricia was ordered to pay my legal fees, a judgment I suspected would never be fulfilled. "Consider it over," Marcus advised, when I asked about pursuing the fee reimbursement. "Some victories aren't worth the cost of collecting them." I took his advice, ready to put the whole saga behind me. But Meadowbrook Estates wasn't quite finished with its lessons in community dynamics. "Jack, got a minute?" Eleanor Chen was standing at my front gate one Saturday morning looking uncharacteristically hesitant. In her 8 months as HOA president, she'd transformed the association from Patricia's punitive regime into something that actually served the community. "Always," I replied, inviting her onto my porch. "Coffee? Please." She settled into a rocking chair, one I'd built myself in my restored workshop. "This is about the Hannity house on Sycamore." The Hannity place had been vacant for nearly a year since the elderly couple moved to Florida. It had recently sold, but construction fencing had gone up immediately, blocking any view of what was happening on the property. "New owners doing major renovations?" I guessed. Eleanor grimaced. "Not exactly. The property was purchased by Patricia, Donovan's brother-in-law, Mitchell Crane. He's a developer." I felt a prickle of unease. And he's submitted plans to convert the single-family home into a duplex, which is technically allowed under county zoning but violates our covenant. When the architectural committee raised concerns, he threatened to sue the HOA for selective enforcement and personal bias. I set down my coffee mug. "Patricia's fingerprints are all over this." "That's my assumption as well. It feels like a deliberate provocation." Eleanor leaned forward. "The board wanted me to ask if you'd be willing to consult, given your background in architecture and experience with handling difficult HOA situations." I laughed despite myself. "You mean, am I willing to help fight the new proxy war Patricia's launched?" "Something like that." She smiled ruefully. "I know you've had more than your share of HOA drama, but you have a perspective the rest of the board lacks." I considered declining. I'd already spent too much time and energy on neighborhood politics, but there was something about Eleanor's approach, collaborative rather than commanding, that made it hard to refuse. "I'll look at the plans," I offered. No promises beyond that. 2 days later, I found myself in Eleanor's dining room reviewing Mitchell Crane's renovation proposal with the architectural committee. The plans were technically sound but clearly designed to push every boundary possible. maximum height, minimum setbacks, and a modern aesthetic that clashed deliberately with the neighborhood's traditional style. He's daring you to reject it, I concluded after reviewing the details. If you do, he'll claim it's personal vendetta based on his connection to Patricia. If you approve it, he creates an eyesore that undermines property values, the very thing HOAs are supposed to protect against. Exactly our dilemma, said Ron Phillips, the committee chair. Either way, we lose. I tapped the plans thoughtfully. Unless you change the game entirely. What do you mean? Eleanor asked. Stop playing defense. Patricia, through her brother-in-law, is counting on the HOA reacting exactly as she would, with rigid enforcement of rules. Instead, engage with the community. Make this about collaborative neighborhood planning rather than top-down control. The approach we developed over the next week was unprecedented in Meadowbrook's history. Instead of the architectural committee making a unilateral decision, Eleanor organized a community design workshop. Neighbors were invited to review the plans and offer constructive feedback. Mitchell Crane was specifically invited to present his vision directly to residents. To everyone's surprise, he showed up, a tall, silver-haired man with Patricia's same imperious bearing. His presentation was slick but condescending, clearly expecting hostility. Instead, he faced thoughtful questions and specific concerns, not about rule violations but about practical matters. How increased density would affect street parking, whether the modern design could be modified to better complement existing homes, suggestions for landscaping to maintain privacy between properties. I watched his face as he gradually realized this wasn't the angry mob he'd expected. These were engaged neighbors speaking the language of collaborative community development rather than rigid rule enforcement. The workshop concluded with a community vote on a compromise proposal. Mitchell could proceed with the duplex conversion, but with several modifications suggested by neighbors, including design elements that would help it blend better with surrounding homes and additional off-street parking to mitigate impact. This isn't binding, Eleanor explained to the gathered residents. The HOA doesn't have the authority to demand these specific changes, but it represents our collective voice as neighbors, and we hope Mr. Crane will consider it in that spirit. Mitchell, left without committing either way, but I noticed he'd carefully tucked the annotated plans into his briefcase. 2 weeks later, revised plans arrived at the HOA office. While not incorporating every suggestion, they included enough meaningful compromises to be considered a good faith response. The project was approved without controversy. You know what this means? Eleanor said when she called to tell me the news. Patricia's strategy backfired. She sent her brother-in-law to create division, and instead he became part of the first truly collaborative development process in Meadowbrook's history. I had to smile at the irony. Sometimes the best revenge isn't countering force with force, but transforming the nature of the conflict entirely. We're thinking of formalizing the approach, Eleanor continued, excitement evident in her voice, creating a new covenant amendment that establishes community design review for major projects. Less about rigid rules, more about neighborhood input and collaborative problem-solving. The anti-Patricia approach to community governance, I observed. Exactly, and we have you to thank for the inspiration. After we hung up, I sat on my workshop porch, watching the afternoon light filter through the trees. From this vantage point, I could just see the corner of the clubhouse, the building that had become the unlikely catalyst for transforming Meadowbrook Estates. Sometimes you have to fight for what's yours. But the real victory isn't in winning the battle, it's in changing the war itself. A year after the workshop demolition that started it all, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in my backyard, applying finish to a cradle I was building for my niece's second child, when a familiar, silver Mercedes pulled up across the street. Patricia Donovan stepped out, looking both familiar and changed. The imperious bearing remained, but something about her seemed diminished, not physically, but in that indefinable quality of a person who has lost their center of gravity. She approached my fence hesitantly, as if expecting me to chase her away. When I simply nodded in acknowledgement, she seemed to gather her courage. "Mr. Reeves," she began stiffly, "I was in the neighborhood visiting my sister and thought I should address some unfinished business." I set down my brush, giving her my full attention but saying nothing. "My lawsuit was dismissed, as you know," she continued. "The judge ordered me to pay your legal fees." "I haven't pursued collection," I pointed out. "I'm aware. Nevertheless, I have an obligation." She produced an envelope. "This covers the full amount, plus interest." I took the envelope, surprised. "Thank you. That's unexpected." She straightened her shoulders. "I believe in following rules, Mr. Reeves, even when they don't favor me." The irony of that statement hung in the air between us. I could have pointed out the hypocrisy, but something in her expression stopped me. This wasn't the same woman who had demolished my workshop with casual cruelty. This Patricia Donovan had been humbled in ways I hadn't anticipated. "I hear Meadowbrook has changed considerably," she said, glancing toward the clubhouse visible in the distance. "For the better, I think. More focus on actual community, less on control." She pressed her lips together. "Mitchell, my brother-in-law, told me about the design workshop approach. It's not how I would have handled things." "No," I agreed. "It's not. But he says it was effective. More so than litigation would have been." She seemed to be working through something internally. "Perhaps there's a lesson there." I couldn't resist. "About catching more flies with honey than vinegar?" The ghost of her old sharpness flashed across her face, then faded into something like resignation. "About the limits of authority, perhaps, and the value of collaboration." We stood in silence for a moment. There would be no grand apology, no tearful reconciliation. Patricia Donovan wasn't built for that kind of emotional surrender. But in her own rigid way, she was acknowledging something had changed, in Meadowbrook, and perhaps in herself. "Your workshop came out well," she finally said, nodding toward the structure. "Better than the original, I'd say." "It is," I agreed. "More thoughtfully designed, better integrated with the property. Sometimes destruction creates the opportunity for improvement." She caught my meaning, a flicker of understanding passing between us. "Well, I should go." As she turned to leave, I found myself calling after her. "Patricia." She paused, looking back. "The new HOA is considering amendments to the architectural guidelines. They're seeking input from all residents, past and present. Your experience could be valuable if offered in the right spirit." For an instant, I glimpsed something like longing in her expression. The desire to matter, to contribute, to be part of something rather than merely in control of it. "I'll consider it," she said simply, and walked away. I never saw Patricia Donovan again, though I heard she eventually settled in a coastal community where she became involved in wetland preservation, channeling her formidable energy into protection, rather than control. As for me, I remain in Meadowbrook Estates, serving occasionally as an advisor to the architectural committee, but mostly focusing on my true passion, creating beautiful, functional pieces in my workshop. The land beneath the clubhouse remains in my name, though I've established a trust ensuring it will always serve the community. Some battles change us in ways we never anticipated. The workshop that was destroyed gave rise to something more valuable, a template for turning conflict into collaboration, control into community. Not a bad legacy for a structure that Patricia Donovan once dismissed as an eyesore. In architecture, we're taught that the most important part of any building isn't what you can see. It's the foundation beneath, the invisible structure that holds everything else aloft. The same, I've learned, is true of communities. Rules and regulations have their place, but they're not the foundation. Trust, respect, and genuine collaboration, these are the elements that truly support a neighborhood, worth living in. And sometimes, it takes a little strategic demolition to clear the ground for something better to be built.